Lovely shirt. Oh my God. Yes. All right, let's come in so we can do the introduction.
It's just me and Liz and Adrian. It's not.
It's going to be fun this time.
Did you get, I know you.
Particular group of 8 students are all very, very stubborn. And they all had a vision for what they wanted to happen.
April 20th, 2024 was the date of the annual senior exhibition in the Len G. Everett Gallery at Monmouth College in Monmouth, Illinois. This year, 8 seniors showed off their work free of judgment and censorship from the college. Each student was unique in their own way, providing both an interesting and balanced atmosphere for the gallery. The reception was expansive, with at least nearly 100 people attending to view the artwork. I was lucky enough to be one of the artists displaying my work in this gallery. Yet, while my work was being displayed, my mind was elsewhere. Particularly, I was thinking about the point I mentioned earlier. The gallery was free of judgment and censorship. While no piece was inherently controversial, some elements of the show could be misunderstood by viewers. Often, misunderstood and miscommunicated art creates moments of censorship within the art world. I learned plenty of examples in art class, and with the book we read for COMM 491. Our book, Free Speech, A Very Short Introduction by Nigel Warburton, has a section highlighting the artist Andres Serrano and his titular piece titled Piss Christ. The piece depicts a plastic crucifix floating in an amber liquid discovered to be the artist's urine. The book highlights how many right-wing Christians were greatly upset, pointing to the fact that Serrano was receiving public funding to create pieces like this in 1987. These same Christians were arguing that the piece itself was sacrilegious as well. Despite this, though, we learned in creating change through art that Serrano has no intention of the piece being sacrilegious. Rather, in the interview Shooting the Klan, an interview with Andres Serrano by Coco Fusco, Serrano was quoted saying, "I have always felt that my work is religious, not sacrilegious. In my work, I explore my own Catholic obsessions. An artist is nothing without his or her obsessions, and I have mine." My mind began to race, wondering if there was a common theme of miscommunication and art censorship. Considering how art is part of free speech, it too can be censored and misconstrued like many free speech topics we discuss in class this semester. However, art in general as a topic was broad, far too broad. Therefore, I decided to narrow it by seeing if there was a common theme of miscommunication and art censorship on college campuses. To explore this further, I first began doing some research on some examples. After my initial research, I came across 2 examples that are relevant to my common theme. The first example is a performance piece involving the artist who was a victim of an alleged sexual assault. This artist was Emma Solkovich. Also known as Mattress Girl, Emma provides an example of art that was in some instances censored. For context, Solkovich was allegedly sexually assaulted, in which she carried her mattress across campus as an act of protest. Both the NYPD police and Columbia University seemed to do nothing until the mattress and other such measures were involved. Despite the protests, there were insufficient grounds to punish her supposed rapist, Paul Neugeser. My initial findings was influenced by an Inside Higher Ed article titled Mattress Protest and Its Aftermath, written by Jeremy Bauer-Wolf. This article helped highlight some of these points, while also bringing up how the school was supporting Neugeser at some points as well. However, I wanted to dive deeper, looking into more scholarly sources of how Emma's piece may affect art and censorship. Through some scholarly research that I was trying to find about Solkowitz, I found this article that sort of explains the ideas that she's trying to show through her art. The ugly, the uninvited, and the unseen in the works of Sia and Emma Solkowitz. This article is by Karina Karakis, and a lot of it is talking about why people like Emma make the art that she does. Particularly on page 369, there's a quote that explains this a little bit. My earlier work explores how a 1990s girl band deployed ugliness in their dress, stage persona, artwork, and lyrics to challenge conventional norms of beauty and scripts of pretty femininity. So, part of what this is going on is explaining why Emma's work, or Sokolowitz's work, is in its sense trying to be ugly. And not ugly in the sense of it looking bad, more so ugly in the sense of it being in your face to make you feel uncomfortable. Similar to how these 1990s girl bands were deploying this sort of ugliness to break down this sort of femininity that's imposed on women. A lot of times the same thing, well, Emma's doing the exact same thing in the sense where when she carries her mattress around, it's making people uncomfortable, whereas conventionally, when women tend to get sexually assaulted, it's sort of something that's more hidden. So the idea of her just bringing this to light and shedding light on it is something that in a way is sort of ugly and uninvited, because not only is Emma trying to not hide it, instead she's showing it to everyone. So Emma's work mirrors this in many ways, in which she creates feminist art by challenging the conventional norms of beauty by just hiding the mattress. Instead, she shows it and makes everyone uncomfortable in doing so. Krakauis explains that by doing so, they push audiences to the very edges and limits of their comfort zone to provoke personal and collective inquiry and growth. This is on page 382 of the same article. Rather than a point of miscommunication, this art was censored simply because people didn't want to look at it. If anything, the campuses and colleges wanted nothing to do with it. Whether it be shame or disgust, we ultimately won't know. Yet, art has been censored before and has been seen as rather vulgar or disgusting by a bunch of different people. And part of this can be seen in David Freeberg's book, The Power of Images, this one right here. Now, he has an excerpt where he talks about when photography first came out, where a lot of people really had problems with it. See, he has a chapter in chapter 13 called The Senses of Censorship, where he really gets into this point talking about how different people were viewing photography. So, on page 353, he has this quote. It is this: as soon as the photographic image is seen as too threatening, it does not qualify as art, nor is it perceived as such. Its threat is too plain. Then, of course, it could be censored, or kept under covers, or appropriately, in the bedroom, and certainly away from children and old maids. It must be censored. This doesn't come as any surprise, though, because people throughout time have always seemed to argue a change in some manner. I remember learning from a music major friend of mine back at home that people who frequent the opera in the 1900s hated the idea of music being recorded on wax cylinders. They argued that the only way to enjoy music is to see it in person. To us now, this is preposterous, considering how practically every song has now been recorded in some type of way. The second relevant example I found over my common theme involves another artist. Now, the book for this artist is written by a different person, and it is called Arts in Crisis, The National Endowment for the Arts versus America by Joseph Wesley Ziegler. Now, Ziegler talks about a very specific instance in 1989 where there was sort of free speech problems going on with America, and particularly with flag burning. Ziegler explained, when a group of protesters decided to burn the flag as a symbolic act in the late 1988, it was natural for Bush and the conservatives to seize on this as an important issue. Ziegler elaborates, saying how the Bush administration initially passed a law protecting the flag from any such damage. Yet, in June of 1989, this law was overturned, with Congress citing that it is our First Amendment right to be able to burn the flag. So, artists and activists were able to burn the flag with pride. However, this didn't stop artists from protesting before the law was put in place protecting them, and in many cases they got arrested because of it. Even in this photo, we see someone getting arrested, and that someone is our next artist, Dred Scott. Scott created a piece called What is the Proper Way to Display a U.S. Flag? The piece showed a picture of flags draped over the casket of Vietnam veterans, with a book allowing them to write what they believed was the best way to display a flag. However, there was one catch. A U.S. flag was displayed on the floor in front of the book, meaning viewers would have to step on the flag to participate in the piece. This piece caused an uproar, eventually bringing Scott to the Supreme Court over it. people were very upset. The original article, Disputed Exhibit of Flag is Ended, written on the piece from 1989 by William Schmidt of the New York Times, has quotes of people's reaction. Senator Bob Dole of Kansas, a veteran at the time, said, "Now I don't know much about art, but I know desecration when I see it." The article advances in critical cultural criminology and analysis of reactions to avant-garde flag art by Michael Welsh, John Sassy, and Alison McDonough. The authors highlight some explanation behind how both sides viewed this art installation. Through civil religion, the U.S. flag is transformed from a secular object into a sacred symbol that became the centerpiece of an interactive artwork created by a minority who sees the flag as a symbol of racist oppression. Basically, Welsh, Sassy, and McDonough were explaining how the conservative right saw the flag as sort of this sacred symbol that represented the American hardship and veteran. However, Scott didn't see it that way at all. Rather, he felt that the symbol, or the flag itself, represented racist oppression that was going on. The problem was, though, that both sides clashed, and the reason why both sides clashed was because the conservative right felt that they were correct in the way of how they saw the flag as a symbol, and Scott felt like he was right in the way that he saw the flag as a symbol. So that's where this miscommunication started getting connected, because in the end they both thought they were right. So, both Scott and Solowitz provide examples of how art can make people uncomfortable, while also hitting on bigger issues. Friedberg puts it best in his book when he says, "What is realistic is ugly and vulgar. Art is beautiful and high." So, does art have a right to be censored if it doesn't fit the qualifications of what other people want? Is there a time and place for when art should be displayed? I still had far too many questions and decided to do some more research. However, this time I looked at what Monmouth had to offer me. For this documentary, I interviewed 3 people, 2 professors and 1 student. The people I interviewed was...
My name is Janice Mars Wunderlich, and I've been a professor here for about 8 years.
My name is Stacy Lopes, and I've worked at Monmouth College 28 years.
My name is Joshua Hinkle, and I'm a double major actually in art and philosophy.
Each person followed the same interview with some slight differences in the follow-up questions. Initially, I asked if their art was controversial, if it had ever been censored before, and if the artist heard of Emma or Scott before. These were my responses.
My main area is ceramics, but I also do painting, drawing.
Primarily sculpture. I do a lot of mixed media, so metals, wood, plaster, concrete.
I'm predominantly a sculpturist. I take non-traditional items and put them together.
Yarn, pom-poms, you name it. A little bit of everything.
Oh, most of my life, but professionally ever since I graduated from graduate school. So that's like 20 some years. Yeah.
Well, 28 here, and then previous to that, I'd say I've been a serious art maker since I was probably 18. That's a long time.
Yeah. 4.
Okay.
No, I don't. My art primarily, I'm a storyteller. I tell the stories that I know, and I suppose there have been some pieces that I've made that I felt like maybe were asking questions, maybe some tough questions, and that's harder work to make because there's a responsibility that you have as an artist when you make that kind of work that is going to kind of push at the boundaries of what's acceptable and what you're questioning, and so you have to be really smart about the work that you're making.
I wouldn't label my art as controversial, but I know that it's depending on the audience. Sometimes it seems controversial to my audience.
And I always, I think that I am smart about the work that I make, but I probably don't make art like some people do that is kind of always making people uncomfortable. I mean, I make art about corn and roller skating and, washing dishes and mowing the lawn.
No, I got you.
I have had some censorship on campus, but it hasn't been broad. I had a show coming up, or a show a couple of years ago, where I wanted to show a nude figure on the poster, and I chose that image. It's actually right there on my wall. I chose an image of a woman giving birth to multiple things, and of course part of giving birth is that you're open and exposed, and animals are coming, babies, stuff was flying out of her vagina, and as a result, that was not chosen to be on the public media. For whatever reason, Monmouth College's publican chose another one of my images to show, which I can understand that, just maybe because they want to be careful about their audience.
I did a sculpture at Carl Sandburg College during my time there, and it was inspired by Dred Scott, and I had a flag on the floor raising awareness for suicide in the veterans community, and the school actually received bomb threats. And luckily it was during COVID and the school was shut down again, so we were just able to remove the installation and it became a non-issue.
No, I have had some people misinterpret what I have done. I created an installation very early in my career here in the gallery about corn hybrids, and I got some pushback because my audience felt like I was maybe trying to make a bigger statement about hybridized corn and how that affected the environment. At the time, there was a lot of new information coming out about the dangers of hybridized corn and its impact on the environment. And so their concerns were real and valid, but that was not my intention with the work. But I did have to make myself available to answer questions about my intention, and especially because Monsanto, which is a corporate science seed facility, was right out here on the edge of town, and they thought that maybe I was like making an attack on Monsanto and the work that they do, and that is not what I was doing. I did do research at Monsanto. I went there, I went to their labs, I asked a lot of questions, but my intention was never to, try and break Monsanto or to do that.
Thing at Sandburg, it became a very big issue where students of the art department were standing guard, making sure people didn't steal the flag or do any number of things that had been threatened.
Yeah, I mean, do you mean specifically to campus or just in other?
Just like anywhere, it could be on campus as well.
No, I don't. I've never run into that with the kind of art that I make.
Yeah, that was the worst case of censorship. I entered an exhibition, or it was an opportunity to exhibit through the Quad City Arts, and I got accepted to have an exhibition at the airport. And my work, and they knew what my work looked like because I submitted the actual work, and the people who do that at the Quad Cities, or who actually held, they were the ones that curated the exhibition. They had no problem with my work, and they didn't foresee the issues. But once I installed my work there, the management of the airport had a big problem with my work. And I put it up on like a Monday, and I got a phone call Tuesday morning saying I needed to come and remove some of the pieces. So I went up the next morning, and the pieces that were in question were actually like animals that were nursing. There was like this mother cat, and she had little teats, and there were baby cats on the teats, and that was the piece that they wanted me to remove, which really surprised me. all the pieces because I thought people understood that babies nurse from teats and that it's part of our human and natural existence. But I took the piece down and I put another older piece that I had in its place, and then I got a phone call the next day, and there were several more pieces that were censored out that they needed to have me come remove. And there was one piece in particular that they told me the front of the piece bothered them because there was a little penis on it. But they told me that I could display it if I flipped it around and put it in the corner so that you could see its butt from and so the backside. So it was literally in timeout for the whole exhibition because its face, so that nobody could see its little private parts.
I think so. I mean, I think that's not just students. I think that's us as human beings, as citizens, that I think when we feel like we're not heard, we take drastic measures. We do things that we know will get attention. Mm-hmm. And I think that has to be, that's understood. I think, it's this whole idea that at some point the oppressed will make themselves heard through action. Mm-hmm. And that could come through music, that could come through writing, that can come, through performance. The part of the whole Black Lives Matter movement was the voice not being heard and bringing attention again to an issue that we have forever had in our country. And it makes people very uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. But the voice that gets silenced can't be silenced forever. And so you take matters into your own hands.
Right. I mean, I've always been a strong proponent that when something is amiss in your life or out of balance, or if you have not been treated respectfully, that you have every right to voice that. And in fact, I'm a huge proponent of being authentic in your art. And if that's something that is on your mind or in your heart, then I absolutely advocate for voicing it and bringing it out into your work, because that makes the work authentic and real and a connection to your lived experience. Sometimes that means that we see drama and trauma in our work, and while I do think there is a difference between using your art as a way to to sort of vomit your past trauma, because art is also about using elements and principles of design and craftsmanship, and about creative use of material. It's more than just the idea of it, but I still feel that you have every right as a person creating to put your own experience in it, and if that experience involves something controversial, then I fully support it. It just needs to be coupled with good craftsmanship and thoughtful use of materials and thoughtful use of elements and principles of design, sort of hand in hand.
We heard when prior times the voices have been silenced.
Absolutely. I mean, we're seeing it now with everything in the going on at Columbia and the suppression of their voice when it comes to the Gaza protests.
So, it was safe to say that each artist seemed to have some instances of miscommunication, censorship, and confusion surrounding their art. Yet another thing came to mind, particularly with the book The Power and Influence of Illustration by Alan Mail. Now, Mail talks about illustration and how censorship in many ways can affect it. On page 133, Mail says, "But when does this leave the role of the illustrator? What is meant by freedom of expression in the context of global media? And does the illustrator have an ethical and moral responsibility, especially when delivering for a global audience?" Broadly speaking, illustration is judged by its impact and influence. However, to many, it might seem that illustration itself is being impacted upon by the structures of a worldwide cultural sensitivity, mindful of the need for religious and perhaps political toleration. Now, I know I just threw a lot at you, but basically what Mail is trying to say, and the idea that I started thinking was, Is it the responsibility of the artist or of the viewer to understand what's going on with a piece? In other words, does the viewer have to do more research to figure out what's going on with the art piece, or does an artist have to be more clear in order to explain what's happening?
I think responsibility is in both camps. And I think that as viewers of art, we have to always understand that there might be something there that we don't fully understand. And we have to ask ourselves questions. We can't be dismissive and be too quick to judge something. And I think that that's kind of human nature. So I would never say, that when the public or somebody else, responds to a piece and says, well, I don't like that, I don't understand it, it's too upsetting, it's this, it's that. Okay, that's a reasonable response. But then have you taken time to step back? Have you taken time to ask any questions? And then I would hope that on the students' part, that they've done their homework, that they have gone through what could be the potential blowbacks to this piece. What might people think? Could this trigger people in a way that I didn't necessarily intend? And if so, how can I change this? Is it the color of it? Is it the form of it? Is it the size of it? I mean, is there something that I could do on my end to make this piece not be a triggering thing, right? So I think that as responsible artists, we never really want to point fingers. You want to respect what people think and listen to them, so that when you're making new work, you can take those things into consideration.
I think if there is a miscommunication, it ultimately starts with the artist, but any good citizen has, the obligation to listen to that communication and act accordingly.
Scott and Solkovich also both had their art pieces on a college campus, where both of their pieces were attempted to be censored in some way. While their message may have been clear to them, the public viewed it very differently. With that thought present, I wondered if art is censored often on college campuses. Then, I wondered if Monmouth has an example of this. Does it? For context, last year around April of the same time, Stacy Lotes was having her annual Creating Change Through Art class. The class focused on community engagement, often having students create an installation together. This installation would then be set up somewhere around campus. This example you're seeing above is another installation that was completed at the time, one done by Emily Henson. Her installation was talking about drunk driving, in which she had a car physically on campus. However, this was not the installation that was the problem that involved the Veterans Memorial. A group of 3 biology students created an art piece protesting the dumping of trash and overfishing within the ocean. These 3 students were Jadlyn Sellers, Jasmine Gentry, and Alexa Johnson. They were interested in the decline of diversity in populations as a whole because of waste and overfishing. Considering how they were biology majors, they decided to set up a piece somewhere near the biology wing. The idea of the piece was to have a giant net draped somewhere with recycled trash and waste from garage sales and donations that the students took in. This would create the idea of how waste and overfishing were hurting the ecosystem of the sea, with a giant net representing this. Based on the wishes of the group, combined with the piece needing to be in a common area, it was hung up in the Veterans Memorial Gallery. And oh boy, did some people have problems.
Yes, I'm very familiar with it. It was a student piece last year. The piece was about environmental issues. It was created by a group of students who were all science majors who had a personal interest in environmental interests, and they felt like they had done all of their homework. They had gotten permission from faculty and staff whose offices were closest to that space, and everybody seemed to be on board. And when the piece was installed, it came to our attention very quickly that not everybody in the building was on board, and that they saw the piece as disrespectful to veterans, and that was absolutely not the intention of the piece. nothing was hung on any of the pieces that are there that are significant to the memory of our veterans. Nothing was ruined, no tape. I mean, they were very careful about what they had done. But I think the placement of that piece, the interpretation was that it might, for some people, be disrespectful, that it looked like we were putting garbage or potentially saying that veterans and their service to our country was garbage. And that was just an absolute miscommunication.
I do remember it, and my understanding of the event was that the student was trying to create a protest about a specific thing. I think it was about like environmental issues, trash being in the ocean or something like that, pollution. But it was placed up in a building that happened to be in the veterans area, and I think that the audience mistook it as being somehow a slander of veterans or trying to make a comment on veterans, and I find them as two very disconnected things. And I think the intention of the artist was to speak about environmental issues, not to disrespect veterans in any way. So it was just an unfortunate, probably lack of communication. Mm-hmm. And that was my interpretation of it.
I took a semester off last year.
To give a quick rundown, we had a piece that was an environmental piece where netting was displayed in the CSB in the Veteran Memorial Hall,
yeah.
And garbage was put on the nets because it was to represent garbage within the sea,
right?
And how it's like an environmental piece.
It's huge.
However, people misconstrued it and thought that it was relating the garbage to veterans. I thought this was relevant to you because you yourself are a veteran.
I wish I'd have been here.
I have a video that I can show you later.
Yeah, I would have definitely counter-protested.
No, of course. Ultimately, the group decided to take the piece down.
It sucks.
However, this is only one side of the argument, the side of the outsider. Considering the people I interviewed were just people that saw what went down, I really didn't get sort of insight of someone that actually worked on the installation itself. For example, the 3 girls that worked on the installation. The only problem with that is they all graduated, so trying to get an interview with them is really, really hard. But it's not impossible. Okay, so what is your name and your major?
My name is Jadlyn Sellers, and I was a biology major. I graduated last year, so 2023. Yes, so most of my artwork was painted. I did a lot of abstract paintings. I did take a ceramics class, and then I took a creating change through art class, which was multimedia. I started doing art when I was in high school, so I guess that would be roughly like 7 or 8 years now. Yes, the situation that you have brought up was a very big issue, I think, campus-wide for a lot of, not just, art students, but a lot of people that were in other majors and such saw this as a big issue of censorship on campus.
So college campuses often have issues of censorship. Our campus even had an instance in which a particular installation in the Veteran Memorial Gallery was taken down. The first is, are you familiar with this instance? Which is funny because this is your actual installation that we're going to talk about. So basically just give me a rundown of what happened, at least from your perspective, and even explain as well maybe what your other group members may have said. Maybe not necessarily speaking for them, but just elaborate on the story.
Right, of course. So, like I said, this was for a class that was titled Creating Change Through Art. So this was a class that was all about community engagement. It was a community engagement course in Monmouth's campus. So I think that that's really important to know because that plays a big part into what the project was to us and to other people as well. My partners and I, we were a group of 3, myself, Alexa, and Jasmine, who were also biology majors with me, so we had been together for 4 years. We were very interested in particular in the decline of diversity of not just animals, plants as well, but we were more focused on the animals, and then not just the decline in diversity, but also just the decline of the populations as a whole. And we were focusing on two specific factors, being overfishing and waste, such as, plastics. You could also go into oil spills and stuff like that, but wastes as a whole affecting the populations of these aquatic life. In the Center for Science and Business, there's a particular wing that is specifically for the biology students, which at that time, this was my senior year, so at that time we were all doing our senior research specifically in that wing. All of our professors' offices were right there. That ranges from not just biology courses, but neuroscience courses, as well as more like ecology-based courses. All those professors were in that wing as well. And where their offices was inside of what is known as the Veterans Memoriam. This is a common area for students. A lot of students typically are there doing homework, but it's always, not always, but for the majority, it's science-based, STEM-based. We wanted to put it in a space that was special to us as biology students because we're doing something that has to do with biology, along with a space that we knew that students were going to populate at least enough to be able to look at our piece. So we used the space for a purpose. It wasn't just, oh, this is a big open area, perfect, let's put it up here. We had put some thought into this. We did know that it was the Veterans Memoriam. We did know that, so we made sure to take precautions going into this before we even started. We emailed every office that was in that wing, along with some that are on the outsides, making sure that these professors were okay with us putting up this installation piece. We described in detail what it would be entailing, that they knew what to expect. We phrased the email stating, if you do not agree with this or if you have any questions or concerns, please reach out. But if you are okay with it, no need to respond. And we left the email sit for a little bit because we weren't gonna, just expect people to respond right away, but we didn't. We got no responses. Absolutely no one reached out to us voicing any concern whatsoever. We also made sure to, recognize that this isn't just a space for Veterans Memorial services. Things like ROTC do occur there, but also other things on campus occur there, such as ASAP hosts stuff there sometimes. Along with, just a few years ago, it was turned into a makeshift little cafeteria place when Monmouth's cafeteria was having some issues. So, it wasn't a space that we saw as a place that we would be disrespecting because other organizations were doing things that were, at the same level of, freedom of expression. They were expressing themselves there too. We prepared for this for about 2 to 3 months of collecting. We made sure to collect already recycled things because the whole point of our project was to, try and help with pollutions in the water and overfishing. So we didn't want to contribute to that by buying our own. Setting up the installation itself took a little under 2 weeks. We were there every day for at least an hour for, roughly those 2 weeks. And this was during class time. So, professors were in and out of their offices the whole time. No one ever said anything to us during this time. My group members and I purposefully, and I can attest to this, that all three of us purposefully avoided the flags and plaques that are hanging in the memoriam. It was a big net that had a whole bunch of trash in it, and then hanging from it were pieces of trash, but also fishing lines and lures and such. So there were hanging components, kind of like a ceiling piece. So we made sure that none of the hanging components were blocking any of the memorial plaques or anything as well, so that everything was still, legible and could be accessed to if they needed to be. We had multiple professors email our teacher for this course behind our backs, even though they had walked by us plenty of times. They chose to stay anonymous, I think because they probably knew that they're walking by all the time. We would have seen ya. And they voiced concerns. They thought that it was disrespectful. They thought that it needed to be taken down immediately. They couldn't believe that it was even okay to be put up in the first place. And like I said, we emailed some of these people, so they could have had the chance to express that concern. And this caused a little bit of a stir then among multiple faculty, and it eventually got sent up to some of the higher staff in Monmouth College, including the president. And we had somebody reach out to our professor herself, and they were stating, this is the wrong time and place for this piece of work. And that kind of took us back. Time and place, there's not exactly a right time and place for these kinds of works. That's the whole point. This is community engagement. This is to try and get people thinking, get them talking, get them included in this. There's never a time or place for those kinds of conversations. So initially that immediately kind of turned us off. We were like, okay, that's a little strange. So we did a little bit of back and forthing with these people, and we weren't ever told directly to take our piece down, but they phrased it in the sense that they said, supporters of the college, the trustees are coming this upcoming weekend, and it was going to be up for that weekend. A lot of them are older. They might find it disrespectful, and not only are they older, but a few of them are veterans themselves. So, and they are the ones that donate the majority of the money to the college, the big sums to the college. So it was pressure. It was being pressured to make a decision about it. No one ever told us you have to take it down. But you get the sense of these people are donating millions of dollars, and they won't donate that if they see this. Okay, what am I supposed to do with that kind of information? It's like, am I gonna leave it up to really peeve these people off and cost the college a lot of money? I don't want to do that to my peers. I was a senior, so I would have been out of there, but I have a ton of people who, that could have affected if that would have been the case. In the end, my group mates and I decided to take it down, but in a public way. So we weren't gonna just, quietly fold it up and dismiss of it. This was not a project that could have been moved. This was, a huge scaled project. So we were able to hold kind of, I guess, like a ceremony for it in a way. We invited anybody who wanted to come. This was campus-wide, so we had a ton of faculty, staff, and students that aren't even in the class nor are students at all. A lot of professors were there in support, which I know my group mates and I appreciated, and they brought their classes with them as well. So people who probably never in a million years would have taken the time to look at this. Those kinds of faces are now being presented with this kind of information, which is kind of the beauty in this instance.
All right. Do you feel like then Monmouth College allows students to express their art and ideas freely without censorship?
I do not. I think that my example is a very, very clear example. And like I said, there were a lot of people there who witnessed this censorship as well. So I think that a lot of people could speak on that. I do know that they have had other issues in the past, specifically with this class. of censorship. I don't think it was on the same scale necessarily, but I do know that there have been other issues in the past of artists on this college's campus being censored. Yes.
You know what? I'm going to change my answer. Finding out about that censorship last year, I'd say no, because that's unacceptable.
So, based on Jade and Josh, Monmouth actively censors art and hurts students' freedoms, right? Well, like many topics of free speech, the answer isn't always concrete. I think I'll let Stacy and Janice say it the best when they talk about the college.
Yeah, it's a big one.
I think so. And I think, you know, when I was talking about President Wyatt supporting our students, and also the piece that we were talking about, the environmental piece last year in the Veterans Room, President Wyatt was also supportive of that and said that the students didn't have to take it down. But I told him that after many conversations, that's what the students ultimately decided to do. So I feel like, yes, students are supported. I feel like faculty, staff, administrators, we want students to be responsible for what they do. We don't want to, I mean, we might want to question what's going on. I don't think we want to intentionally, though, hurt someone or be malicious in the way that we do things. And I think that students do their best to not do those things, that they work hard to be mindful of what they're doing. And as I said before, sometimes you can't anticipate how somebody is going to react to a work. And so there are always going to be things that will come up that you say, oh, that was not my intention. And so maybe you have to apologize. Maybe you just explain it better. And that's what should be happening.
I've never experienced the perspective of being a student here. I've only experienced the perspective of being a fine arts faculty, but I can speak to my experience making work that is maybe on the edge of what is considered palatable for the typical population. And I've been nothing but encouraged to make the work that I make, and I've had no instances where someone has asked me to tone it down, other than choosing, you know, an image other than my vagina lady to go out on the big blast, e-blast. And I compare that to my undergraduate experience. I went to a religious institution for my undergraduate, and I was not allowed to show my work on campus. And even for my BFA show, had to be off campus because it contained nude figures. And at the time I had just experienced having a child. I had just birthed my first child, and I spoke about that in my BFA project. It was about the change that took place in me from physically from giving birth, carrying a child, but also the fact that I was a brand new mother at age 21. And I was moving from a child myself into becoming a mother and having this huge responsibility of parenthood. And I wanted to speak to that critical moment in my life. So my figures were extremely vulnerable. They were full, large scale, nude. They were sad. They were, you know, going through this I really put all this intense emotion, and the school absolutely would not allow me to show it on campus. So I had to find a gallery off campus to show my BFA work. And the irony of that is that they also chose me because of my grade point average. I was the top performer in my college. So in the College of Fine Arts and Communications, I was the top scholar. And so I received an award, and they asked me to speak at graduation. But the trick was that my work had been banned from campus. And normally if an artist gets that award, they speak about their work and they showed their work. But here I was being honored, but I could not show my work or display my work in any way on campus because it was considered too sketchy to be on campus. So I know what it is like to not be accepted on a campus, even though I'm doing everything I could to be an excellent student. My imagery was still not acceptable.
Art gets misconstrued constantly throughout life. The example we had at Monmouth is no different than other situations we've been through. Friedberg, at the start of his chapter on censorship, highlights the fact of how two great minds ultimately can just have different opinions. A great example of this is Titian's Venus of Urbino, a piece created in 1543 and considered by many to be one of the first examples of porn. Our book had a very detailed chapter about porn, explaining how people were arguing it's a First Amendment right, just like art. Luckily, for this case, Titian's Venus suffers from free speech problems in both porn and art. Friedberg brought up how Algernon Swinburne, an English poet and writer, sort of had something a little interesting to say on the painting on page 345. This is right at the start of the chapter, like how I mentioned earlier. Swinburne's quote about the painting is, "As for Titian's Venus, Sappho and Victoria in one, 4 lazy fingers buried dans les fleurs dans son jardin. How any creature can be decently virtuous within 30 square miles of it passes of my comprehension. I think of her Tannhauser need not have been bored, even until the end of the world, but who knows?" Unfortunately, I feel like what Swinburne is saying in this is his sort of a sexual sensibility, or a thought that this piece is just so erotic in the sense that he enjoys it, right? Now, the interesting part with this is Mark Twain, the English poet and writer, also saw this piece and had something to say about it. And what Mark Twain said, his first couple of lines talking about Titian's Venus is, "You enter the Uffizi," which is where the Venus was, "and proceed to the most visited little gallery that exists in the world, the Tribune. And there, against the wall, without obstructing rag or leaf, you may look your fill upon the foulest, the vilest, the obscenest picture the world possesses, Titian's Venus." I think it's safe to say that Mark Twain was not a very big fan of Titian's Venus. So, does Twain's comment make Swinburne's wrong? No. Both are entitled to what they believe and to what they can write. As Josh says,
Writing is an artistic activity.
However, a problem would occur if Twain decided to censor the painting because he didn't like it. Like how Krakus infers, you have to be okay with being uncomfortable. The same can be said for Monmouth College. Yes, art gets censored, but so does art everywhere. Monmouth itself can't be perfect. However, that doesn't give this institution, or any other, an excuse to censor work because they don't like it or they don't understand it. Rather, art, like any other free speech expression, should be heard and learned from. Miscommunication, misunderstanding, and disgust over different ideas just lead to censorship in the long run. Mark Seiber has a point in his article, The Art of Censorship, in which he provides examples in history of when censorship was at its worst. During the Third Reich, Adolf Hitler often had the final say on what could and couldn't be censored. Seiber said, "Those composers who did not fit Hitler's ideal had their works labeled as degenerate. Manuscripts were burned, performances cancelled, while the composers or artists themselves often fled or were killed. A dark age for music and arts, the Interrete label was perhaps the most brilliant form of censorship ever created and implemented." Now, you would be correct to say that comparing this censorship to Nazi Germany is extreme. However, Josh brings up an important point in the interview, saying,
Going on at Columbia and the suppression of their voice when it comes to the Gaza protests.
Censorship is still constant in this day and age and never changing. Freedom of speech among art, among college campuses, and the world is incredibly important. It allows us to argue against the powerful and corrupt and see how we can better the world through our involvement. And then, do you feel like art should be censored?
No, I do not. Like I said, I think that the big thing for me is there's a time and place for these things. There's no time, there's no place. Art is art for that reason, and it should be something that can be shown freely. I think, however, that art being censored can be beneficial in some ways. I think that, like I said, we had way more support for our project than we ever would have had if it hadn't been censored. I think that it can bring these more controversial, sometimes controversial topics, sometimes just in the way it's being presented as controversial, but it can bring these topics to light a lot more than what it could have been just, hanging in a gallery somewhere. So, no.
Censorship, I think, is a slippery slope. I think, we have things in place within our society. We have ratings, we rate movies, we put explicit content on video games, on music, and I think one could say that those are forms of censoring or informing an audience that there may be material that you find disturbing. But I think that we don't want to burn books. We don't want to erase history. And a lot of our history is hard and a lot of it is ugly. But we can't censor that. I mean, it is who we are. We have to understand and come to terms with it in some way. And I think that art, when it really pushes at the limits, can help us to grapple with those hard things about our histories, about what we're living in right now. I mean, we live in a really complicated world right now. And if art can be the conduit in which we can try to understand those things, no matter how upsetting it might be or how much I dislike it, I don't think censorship is the answer to that.
Should be censored in any capacity.
It's a First Amendment protected activity. I don't think anybody should be censoring art.
I have a really hard time with censorship because I've been censored multiple times, and I know that if people would just understand my message, that they would have a deeper appreciation for the work. But a lot of times people will just glance at it and not take the moment to learn about it, to understand it, and therefore they get offended. And so I have a very hard time censoring work, but also I have seen artwork that is hurtful or hateful, and I think that I don't necessarily condone work that is hurtful or hateful towards people. So I would say, like, I'm 99% against censorship, but I'm also surprised sometimes about the lengths that humans can go to hurt each other. And so I don't, and maybe it's not necessarily even art that's being made, it's something else, but they're calling it art, they're coming into the art realm. Mm-hmm. And in that case, I do think that it's maybe appropriate to at least I guess have some form of censorship, or just understand what the values are of the place that it's, the work is being presented. So I don't know. That's a hard one, isn't it? Because I hate censorship, but I also am not surprised that every once in a while there's something that comes along that it's like, I don't really want to have white supremacist artwork in my space, you know, and it's like I understand that there are things that are truly absolutely toxic.
Freedom of speech gives voice to the voiceless, and art gives vision to the blind. Without it, we'd just be living in a world of darkness.
Bye.